Picture yourself opening your eyes in the middle of the night. The fire has almost gone out. Every breath hangs in the air as a cloud of ice crystals, and the cold bites through your skin with a speed that feels almost alive. Beyond the faint glow of the embers, an endless, frozen landscape stretches into darkness. Somewhere out there, wolves are hunting. Somewhere closer, the wind has begun to rise. By sunrise, the temperature may have dropped low enough that a simple mistake, wet clothing, a twisted ankle, a few hours without food, could become a death sentence. Now imagine there is no rescue coming. No insulated house, no central heating, no grocery store waiting just a few miles away. Everything that keeps you alive must be hunted, gathered, stitched together, or wrestled from a landscape that seems determined to erase your existence. Most of us like to think we'd adapt, but the reality is far less comforting. Dropped into the Ice Age with everything you know today, you would almost certainly be dead within days. That raises a remarkable question. How did a tropical primate survive one of the coldest periods in Earth's history? The answer isn't simply that our ancestors became tougher. In fact, by nature, humans were astonishingly ill-equipped for the world they entered. Our species evolved beneath the warm skies of Africa, where freezing winters were not the force shaping our bodies. We lacked thick fur, insulating blubber, and nearly every natural advantage that allows Arctic mammals to thrive. Yet somehow, those same vulnerable humans spread across continents buried beneath ice. The story of how they accomplished that is stranger, darker, and far more ingenious than most people ever imagine. That vulnerability wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was an evolutionary mismatch. Compared with the animals that already inhabited Ice Age Europe and Asia, humans seemed almost absurdly unprepared. Woolly mammoths carried thick layers of insulating fat beneath shaggy coats that trapped warm air close to the body. Reindeer grew dense winter fur with hollow hairs that reduced heat loss. Even wolves survived because millions of years of evolution had equipped them for freezing climates. Humans arrived with bare skin, relatively little body fat, and a physiology shaped by generations spent in the warm environments of Africa. The consequences were immediate. As your body loses heat, it doesn't simply become uncomfortable, it begins shutting down. Blood is redirected away from your fingers and toes to protect your vital organs, leaving your hands numb and clumsy just when you need them most. Stay in the cold for too long, and frostbite can permanently destroy tissue. Lose heat faster than you can replace it, and hypothermia follows. Confusion replaces clear thinking. Muscles refuse to cooperate. Eventually, even the instinct to survive begins to fade. Cold, however, was only half the battle. Surviving low temperatures demands enormous amounts of energy. Every shiver burns precious calories, turning food into heat just to keep your core temperature stable. During the Ice Age, those calories were never guaranteed. A failed hunt or a stretch of bad weather could leave entire groups trying to endure freezing nights on empty stomachs. Starvation and cold reinforced one another in a brutal cycle. Without enough food, the body struggled to stay warm, and without staying warm, finding more food became even harder. It's tempting to believe that human intelligence alone solved these problems, but clever ideas mean very little if your body freezes before you can use them. Survival depended on much more than sharp minds. Every advantage our ancestors relied upon had to be invented through experience, refined over generations, and shared across communities. Unlike other animals, humans couldn't evolve fast enough to match the Ice Age. Instead, they found another solution. If their own bodies couldn't provide the protection they needed, they would borrow it from the creatures that already could. The first solution was as ingenious as it was unavoidable. Humans transformed other animals into something evolution had never given them, a second skin. Clothing was no longer just a covering. It became a biological extension, allowing a species poorly adapted to freezing environments to survive where its own body could not. That transformation began with the hunt. Reindeer, foxes, wolves, bison, and, on rare occasions, even bears offered more than meat. Their hides carried the insulation that had allowed them to thrive through countless winters. Obtaining those hides, however, demanded extraordinary risk. A reindeer might outrun you across open tundra. A bear could just as easily become the hunter instead of the hunted. Even scavenging from a carcass was dangerous, as wolves, hyenas, or other predators were rarely far away. Every hide represented not just a resource, but a gamble in which failure could prove fatal. Once an animal had been brought down, the work was only beginning. Fresh hides spoil quickly, stiffen as they dry, and become useless unless they are carefully prepared. Using finely crafted stone blades, Ice Age people scraped away flesh and fat before softening the skin through repeated stretching, scraping, and treatment with animal brains or fat, whose natural oils helped preserve flexibility. It was painstaking work that could take days, sometimes longer. Yet, there was little choice. A poorly prepared hide might crack in the cold or lose its ability to trap warm air, turning valuable protection into little more than frozen leather. Even then, early clothing had its limits. Simply draping hides over the body left gaps where icy wind stole precious warmth. Heavy skins shifted as people walked, exposing arms and legs to freezing air. They worked well enough to delay death, but they were far from efficient. Around 30,000 years ago, a remarkably small invention began changing that equation. Archaeologists have uncovered delicate needles carved from bone and ivory, many complete with carefully drilled eyes for threading sinew. These tools allowed hides to be stitched into garments shaped for the human body. Sleeves could fit snugly around the arms. Trousers protected the legs. Boots wrapped tightly around the feet, while layered clothing trapped pockets of warm air instead of letting them escape. It is difficult to overstate what this meant. Tailored clothing didn't merely make people more comfortable, it expanded the range of places humans could call home. Regions that had once been nearly impossible to inhabit became accessible because people carried their own portable microclimate wherever they went. In a sense, this was evolution unfolding by a different path. Instead of waiting thousands of generations for thicker fur to emerge, humans borrowed the adaptations of other species and reshaped them with their own hands. The warmth that protected them was never truly their own. It had first evolved on the backs of the animals sharing the frozen world, and by learning to wear that insulation, our ancestors extended the limits of the human body far beyond what biology alone had ever intended. Clothing solved only part of the problem. It kept heat close to the body, but it couldn't stop the relentless wind or shield people from nights when temperatures plunged far below freezing. For that, our ancestors needed something even more important than warm clothing. They needed shelter. And in many parts of Ice Age Europe, the landscape offered remarkably little to work with. Today, it's easy to picture prehistoric people surrounded by endless forests. During the coldest phases of the last Ice Age, however, much of northern and eastern Europe looked very different. Vast stretches of land resembled a frozen grassland known as the Mammoth Steppe. Trees were scarce, growing only in scattered patches where conditions allowed. Without large forests, there was little timber for building walls, roofs, or permanent homes. Caves provided refuge where they existed, but suitable caves were uncommon and often already occupied by predators. So people turned to the one building material the landscape supplied in abundance: the remains of mammoths. Across modern-day Ukraine and parts of Eastern Europe, archaeologists have uncovered remarkable circular structures built from mammoth skulls, jaws, ribs, tusks, and massive leg bones. These weren't random piles left behind by scavengers. The bones were deliberately arranged to form stable walls, creating the framework for shelters that could withstand powerful winter winds. Some sites contain the remains of dozens of mammoths, suggesting generations of hunters returned to the same locations, gradually transforming the bones of these giants into durable homes. To modern eyes, the idea of living inside a house built from skeletons feels unsettling. For Ice Age families, it was simply good engineering. Mammoth bones were enormous, incredibly strong, and resistant to decay. Their curved shapes locked together surprisingly well, creating sturdy frames that could support heavy coverings of animal hides. Those hides acted as the outer shell, while layers of grass, earth, snow, or additional skins helped seal gaps against the freezing air. Every layer trapped precious warmth inside while keeping the biting wind outside. Fire completed the design. Hearths placed near the center of these shelters provided more than light and heat. They created a stable living environment where wet clothing could dry, tools could be repaired, food could be cooked, and families could gather through the endless winter nights. The shelter itself became a carefully managed system, balancing insulation, ventilation, and heat retention long before anyone understood the science behind it. These homes reveal something profound about human survival. Our ancestors weren't merely enduring the Ice Age, they were redesigning their environment to overcome it. Faced with a frozen world that offered almost none of the materials they needed, they transformed the largest animals on Earth into architecture. It was an extraordinary feat of practical ingenuity, proving that when nature failed to provide suitable shelter, humans learned to build one from whatever the landscape left behind. Even with tailored clothing, well-built shelters, and carefully tended fires, one challenge remained beyond human control: winter itself. During the harshest phases of the Ice Age, the cold didn't last for a few weeks or even a single season as we know it today. In many regions, freezing conditions dominated most of the year, shortening growing seasons, reducing animal migrations, and making food one of the most unpredictable resources on Earth. For hunter-gatherers, surviving winter wasn't simply about staying warm, it was about finding enough energy to keep producing heat in the first place. Every heartbeat, every step through deep snow, every shiver demanded calories. Unlike modern humans who can replace those calories with a trip to the supermarket, Ice Age families depended entirely on what they had managed to hunt, gather, or preserve months earlier. If those supplies ran low, the body faced an impossible calculation. It had to decide where its remaining energy would go. The human body has several ways of stretching its reserves. As food becomes scarce, it first turns to stored glycogen, a limited supply of carbohydrates kept in the liver and muscles. Once that is exhausted, metabolism shifts toward burning body fat, providing a slower but longer-lasting source of energy. At the same time, many physiological processes begin to slow. Physical activity decreases. Hormone levels change. The body becomes increasingly efficient at conserving every available calorie. Anyone who has experienced prolonged fasting or starvation knows this feeling. Movement becomes sluggish, thinking slows, and even staying awake can feel like unnecessary work. This remarkable flexibility has led some researchers to ask an intriguing question. Could ancient humans have pushed these natural energy-saving mechanisms even further? One controversial hypothesis suggests that certain prehistoric populations may have entered prolonged periods of extreme metabolic slowdown during particularly severe winters, a state that has sometimes been compared to hibernation. The idea emerged after researchers examined fossil remains from the Cima de los Huesos site in Spain and identified patterns in bone growth that some interpreted as signs of repeated physiological stress, perhaps linked to seasonal food shortages. Rather than proposing true hibernation like that of bears or ground squirrels, supporters of the hypothesis argue that early humans might have experienced an unusually deep state of inactivity, conserving energy until conditions improved. Most paleoanthropologists, however, remain unconvinced. Critics point out that the skeletal evidence can be explained in other ways, including malnutrition, illness, or ordinary developmental stress. There is also no direct evidence that any human species ever evolved the specialized biology required for genuine hibernation. Modern humans lack the profound metabolic adaptations seen in animals that spend months asleep without eating or drinking, making such a survival strategy difficult to support. Whether the hypothesis ultimately proves correct is almost beside the point. Its significance lies in the fact that respected scientists are even willing to explore such an extraordinary possibility. It reflects just how unforgiving Ice Age winters could become. When researchers seriously consider whether our ancestors may have approached the biological limits of human endurance, it reminds us that surviving those frozen landscapes demanded far more than courage. It required exploiting every possible advantage the human body and the human mind could offer. As winter after winter tested the limits of human endurance, survival became about more than protecting individual lives. Entire populations stood on a knife's edge. A single generation of failed hunts, harsher weather, or shrinking territory could echo through centuries, leaving some groups too small to recover. The Ice Age was not merely a challenge for humanity. It was an evolutionary filter. No story illustrates that more clearly than the fate of the Neanderthals. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals had lived across Europe and Western Asia. They were powerfully built, with broad chests, shorter limbs, and stockier bodies that reduced heat loss, features remarkably well suited to cold environments. They understood fire, crafted sophisticated stone tools, hunted large game, and survived countless glacial cycles long before modern humans arrived. If any human species seemed destined to outlast the Ice Age, it was them. Yet sometime around 40,000 years ago, they disappeared. Exactly why remains one of the greatest debates in paleoanthropology. Climate records reveal a period of dramatic instability, with temperatures fluctuating rapidly over relatively short spans of time. Habitats shifted, herds changed their migration routes, forests gave way to open tundra and then returned again. Every environmental change forced human populations to adapt, relocate, or compete for increasingly scarce resources. At roughly the same time, modern humans were spreading across the same landscapes. Whether the two species competed directly, shared resources, exchanged knowledge, or simply occupied overlapping territories in ways that placed additional pressure on Neanderthal populations is still actively debated. There is no single piece of evidence pointing to one definitive cause. Instead, many researchers believe their disappearance resulted from several smaller disadvantages accumulating over thousands of years: changing climates, declining population sizes, reduced genetic diversity, and competition for food and territory. What makes this story so compelling is that Neanderthals were anything but primitive failures. They were extraordinarily successful humans who had already survived environments that would overwhelm most people today. And still, it wasn't enough. Their disappearance reminds us of a sobering truth. The Ice Age offered no guarantees, no matter how well adapted a species appeared to be. Survival was never a permanent achievement. It had to be earned again with every generation, every winter, and every change in a world that refused to stand still. If there was a single invention that allowed humans to survive the Ice Age, it wasn't the spear, the fire, or even the needle. It was something far less tangible. Each of those technologies mattered, but none of them meant much if they disappeared with the people who created them. What truly transformed our species was the ability to share knowledge and carry it far beyond the place where it first appeared. Archaeological discoveries reveal that Ice Age communities were anything but isolated. Stone tools have been traced to quarries hundreds of kilometers from the sites where they were eventually used. Marine shells have been found deep inland, far from any coastline. Rare pigments and ornaments traveled astonishing distances, passing from one group to another across vast landscapes. These objects were more than decorations or trade goods. They were evidence of social networks connecting people who might never have met face to face. Those connections became a powerful survival system. A hunting technique perfected in one valley could spread across an entire region. A better way to prepare hides or shape a bone needle didn't have to be rediscovered by every generation. It could be taught, improved, and passed on. Even during times of scarcity, neighboring groups may have exchanged resources, found mates beyond their own communities, or shared information about migrating herds and changing seasons. Culture itself became a form of adaptation, evolving far more quickly than the human body ever could. That is what ultimately separated our ancestors from every other large mammal living through the Ice Age. Wolves cooperated within a pack. Mammoths protected their family groups. Humans built relationships that stretched far beyond the horizon, creating networks of knowledge that outlived individuals and even entire communities. In the end, the greatest survival tool our ancestors ever possessed wasn't something they carried in their hands. It was something they carried between one another. Long before cities, agriculture, or written language, cooperation had already become humanity's most powerful adaptation, allowing a vulnerable tropical primate to endure a world that biology alone should never have allowed it to survive. So, how did a tropical primate survive one of the coldest periods in Earth's history? The answer was never a single invention or a moment of extraordinary luck. Humans didn't conquer the Ice Age because they grew thicker fur or evolved stronger bodies. In many ways, we remained the same vulnerable species that first walked out of Africa. What changed was something evolution had rarely seen before. Our culture began adapting faster than our biology ever could. Every generation inherited more than genes. They inherited knowledge, a better way to stitch animal hides into clothing, a stronger shelter built from the resources at hand, a more efficient hunting strategy, a distant ally willing to exchange food, tools, or information when survival hung in the balance. Each discovery became part of a growing library of solutions, passed from one group to the next until it no longer belonged to individuals, but to humanity itself. That may still be our greatest evolutionary advantage today. We solve problems together, building on the ideas of countless people we've never met. From the warm homes we live in to the technology that protects us from environments our bodies were never designed to endure, we are still relying on the same strategy that carried our ancestors through the Ice Age. The warmth you feel on a cold night is more than a modern convenience. It is the final link in a chain stretching back thousands of generations. People who endured winters that erased entire human populations, refused to surrender to a frozen world, and survived long enough to ensure that one day you wouldn't have to.